Yeah, so welcome to this afternoon's update on the Northwest Cluster. Very excited to introduce colleagues Joe Howe and Kirstie Simpson. So a bit background to where they're coming from. So Professor Joe Howe is the Executive Director of the Thornton Energy Research Institute at the University of Chester, where he's there in various other institutions around the country, many years experience working with industry on big environmental projects. And is very much driven by opportunities for industry to deliver on the £600 billion infrastructure projects committed to 2030. So exciting times there. Joe's very heavily engaged in the UK Clean Growth agenda and has various roles, including with the UK Decarbonised Gas Alliance, and is chair of the Northwest Hydrogen Alliance. He's also the Northwest Academic Lead for the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, otherwise known as IDRIC, which has just been announced and will be launching next week, I think, and sits on the board of the Department of Education, Engineering, Construction Industries Training Board, where he can pursue his passion in developing STEM skills across the country. And then following Joe will be Associate Professor Kirstie Simpson, who is Deputy Dean of Chester Business School, where she is responsible for the university's strategic economic development team. So in addition to her academic responsibilities managing projects, she's recently been focusing on the industrial decarbonisation challenge, subject close to our hearts, and development in particular skills throughout the supply chain. And so she's also very keen on building links between academia and industry, particularly with a focus on learning and establishing a qualified future workforce through innovative initiatives such as learning mobility and co-creation of live projects working with real world problems. So excellent to have both of you with us today. Really looking forward to hearing what's going on in the Northwest Cluster. Thank you very much. Over to you. So just a couple of before I hand over, housekeeping. I think we're all fairly accustomed to this now. If everybody could turn their videos off when they're not speaking and their microphones off, just to help with the broadband and the interference. Questions in the chat function, and then I will invite people to voice their questions when we come to the Q&A session, and hopefully have a good discussion through that route. Okay, thanks very much.
That was a good start. I already muted myself. Thank you very much, colleagues, for having Joe and I with you today. We come as a bit of a double act. So we won't be doing separate presentations. We'll be doing a joint presentation, but we'd like to start off, if we may, with a video about HyNet, just to sort of get us all into the frame of mind. And then Joe and I will unpack a little bit of that in relation to skills, particularly subsequently in our presentation, and then welcome questions from you after that. So Vic, are you happy to run the video?
I am indeed. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Ready, go?
Not only are we one of the most important industrial clusters, we also emit a lot of carbon. And therefore it's critical that the business leaders in our region respond and step up to this net zero challenge. Because of our unique combination of both industry and geology, we have the chance to be the global leader in clean energy, clean hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage.
HyNet Northwest are looking at decarbonising the Northwest area by the development of the hydrogen distribution network that will allow companies and industries like ours at Intergen to go from carbon emissions to green energy using hydrogen. Starting in 2025, HyNet Northwest will store and capture carbon, and they'll start to replace fossil fuel gas with clean hydrogen. This will set the northwest of England and North Wales on the path to zero emissions, creating and also protecting jobs.
So, why hydrogen? Hydrogen is an abundant element. It's clean, safe, and releases no carbon dioxide when burned. This makes it a flexible alternative to fossil fuels. And when the wind isn't blowing, or the sun isn't shining, it can be stored, ready to generate energy when renewables can't. we can easily convert the existing systems used to generate heat and electricity, which currently run on fossil fuel gas, to hydrogen, providing a safe transition to a decarbonised world.
The HyNet Northwest carbon capture scheme is going to allow us to capture up to 800,000 tonnes of CO2 per year, which is a really impressive amount.
Here in North Wales, we're really excited and proud to be the first cement plant in the UK to be part of the carbon capture and storage scheme. This is really revolutionary for our business.
HyNet Northwest is based on the production of hydrogen from natural gas. This gas will be fed into the UK's first low-carbon hydrogen plant at the Stanlow Manufacturing Complex, where it will be split into hydrogen and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide will be transported underground through a pipeline. Here, it will join carbon dioxide directly captured from other sites across North West England and North Wales. This includes industry such as CF Fertilisers Ince plant, which makes ammonia for fertiliser, and Hanson's Padeswood Works, which makes cement, as well as other products essential in our day-to-day lives. This carbon dioxide will be safely and permanently stored beneath the seabed in Liverpool Bay. At the same time, clean hydrogen will be distributed via new pipelines, replacing fossil fuels to power our industry, heat our homes, and fuel our vehicles. Hydrogen will be stored in underground salt caverns in Cheshire, similar to those currently used to store natural gas, ready to manage peaks in demand.
Well, HyNet Northwest is a real opportunity. In fact, it's a game changer for Warrington and the Northwest. As the UK responds to the global climate emergency, it's important we all play our part to decarbonise whilst retaining our strong industrial economy.
HyNet Northwest is really vital, and the work to start getting to net zero by 2050 really needs to begin now. HyNet Northwest offers an opportunity for prosperity in the future low-carbon economy.
HyNet Northwest is essential to the businesses in this region. It's also critical to ensure that we are an attractive investment location. We are developing in green skills for the green industrial revolution happening now.
In addition to fuelling industry, this project's going to make enough hydrogen to fuel 2 million homes. It's going to revolutionise how we travel around the city region, how we heat our homes, and how we fuel industry. Things that are going to make our region thrive.
HyNet Northwest is already breaking new ground with its innovative approach. This has put the northwest of England and North Wales at the forefront of this revolution. This is an unmissable opportunity.
Well, hopefully that's fired everybody up before Joe and I start our presentation. And while Vic gets the slides up on the screen, this project has, I guess, consumed Joe and I for a few months, if not longer. And so we'd like to share some of our enthusiasm this afternoon.
Years, Kirstie.
Yeah.
There will be people on the call today that have heard me talk about this before, but yeah, we're moving forward on this. Kirstie.
This afternoon, Joe and I would like to sort of bring, I suppose, into sharp relief the focus that we have through the university, not just on the project itself, but on that wider issue of leadership skills and job creation. So through the HyNet project, Joe and I have been working very hard on developing a study that focuses on workforce and the economic impact of the study. So we'll tell you a little bit about that as we go through our presentation. If you could turn to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Joe first.
So colleagues, what you've seen there with the video, to cut to the chase, is very much the developing proposition, or the proposition, that we will be putting before the cluster sequencing exercise that many of you may well be involved with, or many of you may have heard of, or will have heard the other presentations from other regions as part of this summer school. What's the policy context for all of this? Well, the sort of political context for all of this, at the very least, is the climate emergency, the ecological emergency at the moment. That's certainly being recognised by governments in the run-up to the Conference of the Parties Summit, the UN Summit in November. Over the last few months, we've probably seen an acceleration towards that with the release of a whole suite of different policy documents. You know, on the left-hand side at the top here, you see the 10-point plan, and in there you'll be aware of hydrogen being theme 2, and I think carbon capture is theme 7 within there. So 2 significant issues there. Secondly, the Build Back Better campaign in the post-COVID world, a slight shift away from the industrial strategy to one that seems to be much more focused around the environment, inclusivity, sustainability, health and well-being. And then more recently, the publication of the Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy, which is very much the focus of this summer school in terms of the carbon capture components, the hydrogen components, the fuel switching components, the mobility components, the heating components, many of the things that you saw before in the video that we were talking about. And then finally, over to what Kirstie was mentioning before, our absolute passion. Our passion, colleagues, is very much about making sure that we have the skills and the supply chain capacity within the UK to deliver on this really important agenda. And you can see from the bottom half of this slide some of the work that's been doing by the Green Skills Task Force, amongst other bodies, but also the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Experience and bodies such as the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, which is very much focusing upon this agenda around skills, be it new skills that are required to deliver on this, or be it retraining people in similar industries that could realise the opportunities afforded by the industrial decarbonisation agenda, the hydrogen agenda, the carbon capture agenda. So you can see with some of the initial findings of the Green Skills Task Force are talking about 50,000 jobs in carbon capture utilisation and storage. And already in the Northwest, we're appointing people to be involved in the HyNet consortium activities, but we also have the country's largest carbon capture and utilisation facility in Northwich with Tata Chemicals and their salts facility down there. So there's an amazing amount of work that's going on around the whole skills agenda, capacity agenda to deliver industrial decarbonisation. Very much carbon capture is the enabler to realise the legal requirements of the 4th, 5th, 6th carbon budget and ultimately the Climate Change Act. I could go on, but what's important is about how we get those skills in place. So Kirstie.
Thanks, Joe. And not just obviously in those organisations that are specifically set up to manage those processes that Joe's just identified. We also need to think about those indirect benefits to society in relation to other organisations that we would hope to work towards that low carbon agenda. So on the right hand side of the slide that you can see, in 2020, Russell Reynolds Associates undertook a study focusing on Fortune 500 organisations, big business, and identified through that study that 92% of those chief execs believed that integration of sustainability was critical. Now, of those Fortune 500 organisations, only 48% of them actually integrated sustainability into their operations. So whilst Joe's identified there the roles created through the direct development of clean energy, obviously we're also keen on ensuring that from our perspective, any graduate goes into the workforce understanding about the importance of sustainability in relation to that climate emergency and become sustainability leaders. So they drive that change and that development in their own workforce, but they also understand that they have the business is not a commercial activity divorced from those wider societal and environmental contexts in which it operates. Everyone has a responsibility to ensure sustainability moving forward. So if we could have the next slide, please.
So here, colleagues, are three of the UKRI projects that Kirstie and I are leading on within the University of Chester. These are all funded under the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. I think previous colleagues, if you have been on one of my previous UKCCSRC presentations, I've talked about the industrial cluster, and I talked about the three themes of that industrial cluster's mission. The first one of those is the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre. And before, Claire Goff was mentioning that that's about to be launched. There's a whole series of different themes and research dimensions within that. At the University of Chester, we will be leading on sort of workforce planning issues and supply chain capacities, sector development issues integrated across the whole of the IDRIC theme, and indeed nationally based, cutting across each of the clusters, be that the one in Scotland, Humberside, Teesside, South Wales, and our very own HyNet project. The second theme of the industrial cluster's mission was very much about cluster roadmaps or cluster plans, looking at industrial decarbonisation between 2020 and 2050. And at the moment, our industrial plan pulls together some major industries within the Northwest, the whole of the Northwest, identifying routeways and pathways and key projects around the net zero dimension to ensure the Northwest is very much leading the way to net zero, or indeed industrial sub-zero, because I believe carbon capture and storage offers us that opportunity. What we're doing there is leading on the economic impact side, the skills side. So we're looking at the skills that are required to build the various projects that are being identified, looking at the current provision from colleges, from FE providers, HE providers, and other learning providers to see where those gaps are in the Northwest. We're looking to see where the various bodies are looking to commission the supply chains to deliver on that. And is there an opportunity to ensure that we maximise the economic impact of this fabulous environmental enhancements, of these environmental enhancement schemes? And then finally, there is the whole HyNet project that we've already seen a video of, where we're very much concerned with leading on both the economic study, but also the workforce planning study for that. So that's the very much specific project that you've seen the video on. The cluster plan is looking at the wider integrated projects, the wider projects, as potentially HyNet, as the key anchor project now, begins to expand to incorporate this wider geography. Kirstie.
Thanks, Joe. I think it's important at that point to sort of relate back to those induced economic benefits. So what Joe's described there and what we focused on in terms of the studies so far with HyNet is very much direct economic impact and the development of a direct workforce. But obviously there's a much wider economic impact in relation to HyNet specifically in this case that we're describing. But how do we maximize that through the potential learners that we have access to at the university and other educational institutions? So those young people that are coming through the system now, that they may well be involved in jobs that haven't even got a job title yet. So how do we as academic institutions start to develop a curriculum that supports the development of the skills that are required, both specific in terms of the technical, but also in terms of those wider interpersonal skills that will be required to fulfill the potential of, in this case, the HyNet Consortium's agenda, but in terms of the cluster sequencing, that could be in any of those clusters across the country, and hopefully will be across the country, eventually at least. We're obviously keen for the Northwest to be the first cluster, and we are contributing as much as we can to that process. In relation to the University of Chester, there's a little bit of information there about our size. So we're sort of a mid-sized university. We're not significantly large, but equally we're not small, but very teaching focused. And our students will orient to the applied learning. So again, that brings with it strengths in relation to real life challenge. How do we enable these students to engage with organizations like Cadent, for example? How do we set industrial challenges for our students in things that are yet to be developed? So from a pedagogy perspective, that's a challenge because there's still lots of unknowns, but we still need to develop those young people as well as we can to be the pathway, the workforce of the future for these roles that are not yet identified. So no small challenge. And I suppose it'd be interesting to hear from other colleagues as to how that they could contribute to that. If we could have the next slide, please.
So one of the things that we've been doing at the University of Chester is working with a number of different bodies. You'll be aware of the CCSA's project around capacity building for carbon capture, and you'll be aware of the ongoing work of the Hydrogen Advisory Council as they move towards producing or drafting maybe a hydrogen strategy that the government says it's going to publish sometime in the early summer. Underneath that, there are a whole series of work streams, one of which is around capacity. So one of the things we've been looking at is what do we need to deliver the skills agenda within the UK now. This is very timely because, of course, we've just got this new 16+ education bill that's passing through Parliament at the moment. I believe it's currently going through the House of Lords for its first time. It then goes into committee stage and then comes back out into the House of Commons and then into the House of Lords before it's rubber stamped by the Queen. This will be done, colleagues, I suggest to you, later in the year, maybe early into next year, but that will coincide with the comprehensive spending review, which I understand will do very well from the Department for Education, from the Treasuries. It looks to provide skills for jobs, particularly green skills for jobs. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the capacity agenda to deliver carbon capture utilisation and storage and hydrogen, to build capacity within the workforce around that, be it for universities, further education colleges or other learning providers, to ensure that those people, those businesses engaged with the various clusters can get the skills that they require in the right place at the right time, which align quite nicely with the whole cluster sequencing exercises that the government's talking about at the moment. And clearly what this will require is a whole step up in terms of the amount of people involved in this and the training requirements and the funding that comes along, which I've already hinted at. So what are the emerging skills gaps that we're getting from the work that we're doing at the moment? And this is very early, this is very tentative. Some of our projects have only been going a matter of, well, maybe days in some instances, certainly no more than a couple of months in others. But you can clearly see here what you'd expect: the carbon capture side, the hydrogen side, and then others that we've detailed here. But they're not just all science and engineering. And that's why I love working with Kirstie, because Kirstie reminds me of the more important ones, such as leadership. And it's a really important issue, leadership. One of the things I wasn't expecting is the culture shift that some of these key industries are having to go on, the journey that they're going on in terms of a significant culture shift for them. And they need that leadership, and they need the management skills around that to deliver on this agenda. Kirstie.
Thanks, Joe. So just to summarise what Joe and I have expressed, really from the university's perspective, what we're encouraging in the organisations that we're working with to do is to take this sort of shared sense of purpose around sustainability. So, for example, in the HyNet consortium, there's very much a will to work together for very much a common goal. So from a leadership point of view, that is significant, because that leadership is coming from Progressive in relation to HyNet, and it's driving the rest of the consortium forward because we have a shared sense of purpose, we have that shared sustainability mindset, and we're very clear on what we all want from that partnership. In relation to Joe and I, that's very much about positioning the university at the forefront as the leader, hopefully, in terms of the provision and facilitation of the skills that Joe's outlined in terms of the gaps. But we all want to create impact. We all want that project to succeed. From a university perspective, we're keen on working with our SMEs in the supply chain to ensure that they maximise the potential of HyNet. We've widened our network. Joe is already very well networked in this particular area, but we're starting to broaden that out even further with others who also have that shared sense of purpose around sustainability and hydrogen specifically. We're using opportunities to create knowledge exchange in research, and that impacts on our students, so they get involved in those real life challenges, as I've expressed before. And from our perspective, we very much see our students as the workforce of the future. So however we develop them, generally in terms of that sustainability mindset, that sustainability leadership, but also in terms of the specific carbon capture, hydrogen, the engineering aspects, I guess, regardless of whatever that is, we hope that they will be best placed in that clean energy future. So I think that's all we'd want to say, Joe, other than, has anybody got any questions, areas to discuss, thoughts, suggestions?
I've got other things, colleagues, if Kirstie will let me carry on. And
you carry on, Joe. You carry on.
Just out of interest, Kirstie, this morning I was attending a trade delegation between the UK and Abu Dhabi, and it was being hosted by the United Arab Emirates, but there were key individuals there from the UK as well. But the United Arab Emirates colleagues, they were expressing their ambitions to export 100 million tons of blue ammonia by 2025, producing the ammonia in UAE, but also then storing the carbon in existing or former oil and gas fields over there. So this is a global opportunity for the UK. For me, it's a global opportunity for HyNet as the anchor project within the Northwest. Needless to say, there is a cluster sequencing competition going on at the moment. But I think really we're all in this together within the UK to make sure that we're positioning ourselves for what I think will be a fabulous export opportunity and a fabulous opportunity for the early career researchers that are on this call, Kirstie, to be honest with you. This is a global opportunity to really position ourselves. I'm going to finish there, otherwise my enthusiasm, I'll get carried away with it. Questions?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so brilliant. Thanks ever such a lot, both of you. I think it was really nice to see a different approach to doing a dynamic presentation with you two of you. So it was really refreshing and enjoyed that. So as always, if people could write their questions in the chat, I will try to corral those. I will try and get that so I can see the chat as well as the faces. Yeah, so as Vic said, just put your questions in the chat. I'll give you a few minutes to start getting those in. I think from my perspective also, it's been really nice to hear a cluster update as well, to see another side of the activities within a cluster, to really kind of focusing on skills. And I think I'm really interested in the kind of the extent to which those get integrated. So you talked about some of the gaps in terms of technical issues and leadership, but in terms of, we see it speaks to all those policy initiatives that you talked about earlier, that impact on this from lots of different departments across government. And I think that's a real challenge. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts a little bit more about how you kind of develop those more integrated skills and roles for, as you say, for jobs that don't exist. And that comes from the other side as well, how receptive industry is to bringing in those new roles that maybe see things in a slightly different way and that do integrate across different sustainability agendas and economic agendas as well. So there's a very rambling question.
I was going to say, I know Joe will definitely have, but I'm going to get in there quick before he does. What I would say, Claire, is it's actually quite challenging just within the consortium, because the focus is very much on the new science, the innovation, the technology. And Joe and I keep saying, well, what about the people? Where are all these people going to come from? How are you going to get them trained? Now, there's obviously some parallels with oil and gas, and there's some transferability. But somewhere along the line, there needs to be new programs, and they don't just pop up from nowhere. So there does need to be a strategic approach to the development of the programs that will enable, at the higher levels now, those individuals that will be able to take forward those roles. So that's just a logistical issue, I guess. But in order to do that, the skills agenda needs to be felt to be more important than possibly it is. Now, I know I'm going to let Joe loose now, so be warned.
Claire, since you last invited me to address the UKCCSRC, I think government's moved along a long way. Previously, in my presentation, I talked about the pressing need to potentially join up the likes of business, energy and industrial strategy with the Department for Education, with the Department of International Trade on the export agenda. And do you know what, Claire? I'm now starting to see that joined up thinking, that alignment. And I hope that's one of the differences that you've seen in terms of our presentation today. Now, we're going to have this Green Skills Task Force reporting in the not too distant future. The Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Experience is taking that work and beginning to think through the different standards associated not only with the science, but with the softer end subjects as well. So that then we can have apprenticeship standards or T-level standards or higher T-level standards, which then as we move forward with the education reform agenda, I'm imagining the businesses and some of the big companies in the HyNet consortium, as well as within the big other clusters, are paying a shed load of industrial levy, which many of them at the moment might see as being a tax. All of a sudden, they might start coming to organisations such as the University of Chester or other universities or other training providers and say, well, we've got X many £100,000 here. Can you provide us with this bespoke training package or this aspect? Or could we come and sit in on a bit of this course and a bit of that course? Yeah, I think it will change significantly the way in which we think about skills provision, learning provision into the future, this working interchangeably with industry, particularly for universities like our own.
And just to sort of add to that, and this sort of answers, I hope I pronounced, Phoebe, your name correctly, so apologies if I haven't. But it is difficult to lure industry in because you have to enable them to understand what the benefits of those programs are. So yes, we don't know what the jobs are going to be, but we do know what some of the skills gaps are. So we've got to be proactive. We can't just wait for, as a university, we have to go out there and we have to talk to those industries and actually say, what is it that you think you need? Because many of them have their own internal training programs. So we need to work out what our role is. Is it in apprenticeships, as Joe's outlined? Can we work in partnership? Question mark. And there's still a lot of work to be done, even though, as Joe's pointed out, this, in terms of the skills agenda, the government signals are very positive. So policy is now in place. We need to get the practice sort of to catch up.
I think I'm going to jump, because Robin, did you want to come in here? I'm going to jump over straight to Robin, because I think his question relates directly to that and how you kind of bring in cooperation regionally as well. Did you want to expand on that, Robin? There he is.
Yep. So, can you hear me?
We can.
The issues that you talk about are clearly very important, but I think the national or the probably global. Have you given any thought yet to how you're going to work with the other 6-7 regional clusters to create a consensus, or if not a consensus, a common sounding board that can be used to apply pressure and to regulators, educators, and whatever?
Yeah, absolutely, Robin. Great question. I can take that, Kirstie, to start with. So yes, we have. Your question relates to the other regional projects. So one of the things that Kirstie and I have been doing is working very closely with the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre and with BAYES and with bodies such as the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board and with the Institute for Apprenticeships, etc., to make sure that we can begin to align with all of the different clusters. You'll find that within the clusters, across the clusters, there are certain industries that appear in different geographies. So working through those industries, maybe a company like INEOS might say, well, we need 200 people like this in the Mersey cluster. We need 400 people like this up on the Acorn project, for example. So yes. But at one and the same time, in relation to that, Robin, sometimes when the government decides to introduce new competitions, it kind of sometimes makes it a little bit more challenging at the same time. But I'm hoping that once we get through this latest competition, that will then be an opportunity for us to focus on specifically on UK PLC per se. What we'll find once we've got the cluster sequencing in place and we know where and when and how, and we've got the final investment decisions around those clusters, hopefully we'll have a good understanding of where workforce requirements will be required, when they will be required, what part of that workforce is flexible and can move around, what type of workforce is not so flexible, and therefore we can put in place the training plans or the training opportunities through the various training providers in those sub-regions. And where there isn't that training provision, we can potentially enable that or encourage that to happen through DFE incentives. Or else, of course, a lot of the industries, they do have access to international supply chains, and maybe it might be more efficient and more effective occasionally to bring in those international supply chains.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's much I could add to that. The current cluster sequencing process is competitive. So in terms of sharing amongst clusters, it's limited, obviously, until things have been submitted. But I think Joe's right. The potential for us specifically is through IDRIC and looking at that national plan and how nationally these skills, the national skills shortage, if you like. I think that's the way in to try to answer your question, Robin.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think IDRIC will provide a really valuable space for collaboration and integration across the clusters, definitely, but very long awaited, that is. So Konstantinos, you had another question that was relating to a different type of collaboration between the clusters. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit more, relating to storage as a subject that's been talked about in previous sessions? If you can unmute if you want to.
Hello, thank you. I would like to ask, I've read previously that there is an option of cooperating with South Wales clusters, Wales cluster, excuse me, to provide CO2 storage solution, as this cluster doesn't have a storage site, and the HyNet storage sites are closer to this cluster. So if there is any update or collaboration with this cluster to provide the solution.
Shall I take that, Kirstie?
That's definitely one for you, Joe.
Konstantinos, which area do you live in at the moment? What's your focus?
I'm a commercial analyst intern and working on energy transition.
Which cluster do you focus on?
Currently I'm in Aberdeen.
Okay. So in relation to your question, clearly at the moment with the cluster sequencing exercise, potentially there are some commercial sensitivities, as potentially each of the clusters seek to work up their business case for the final investment decision. Needless to say, I would argue that the HyNet location is ideally located in terms of the carbon capture aspects of the South Wales cluster, for instance. Certainly the Hamilton field and the oh gosh, I've forgotten the other field that we've got that we're utilising or using in the northwest. Certainly it has capacity, but equally, colleagues, I would encourage you to think out width of just the clusters that the government's argued here, because we're involved in a climate emergency, and therefore there are other industrial areas around the UK, some of which are inland. So, for instance, maybe the Derbyshire cement works, for instance, or some of the industries that are in the West Midlands. Where's that carbon going to go to? Is it going to go to HyNet? Is it going to go down to the South Wales, then up to HyNet? Or could some of that go elsewhere? So I think that at the moment, there may well be lots of debates and deliberations going on amongst the clusters to see where different carbon, or where there are different carbon sources that ultimately might be shipped to their clusters and then stored in their old oil and gas fields. And I think that's all part of the competition that's going on at the moment. And for any geographers that's on the call, heaven forbid that geographers would join this particular call, but I think there's a really interesting geography of industrial decarbonisation, a really interesting geography of carbon capture and storage that's going on right now that I'm not seeing written about within the academic literature.
Thank you.
I think it's coming a bit through IDRIC, Joe. hopefully it will happen through that a bit more. So, Francois, you've talked about the Lennox field. Did you want to expand on that a bit? Is that relation to the East Irish Sea?
No, hello. It was the second field, I think.
Yes, absolutely right. I should know.
Okay, sorry.
I'm part of the consortium. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So are there any more questions that people would like to put, not necessarily just on skills, but I know Joe and Kirstie are a font of knowledge on all aspects of the Northwest Cluster, not just on the skills. I think it's really useful to focus on that because it doesn't always get brought up, but if there are any other questions around other aspects of the cluster, particularly in the context of the sequencing competition where they've been busy beavering away at that at the moment. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about the kind of multiple policy agendas and the multiple funding streams, which can be incredibly difficult to navigate through from an academic perspective, trying to understand where all these funding streams filter through. But I would just be really interested to know from your perspective how you find navigating through those, because there's funding for hydrogen, for transformation industries, for CCS. There's lots of different funding streams that can direct towards similar projects, and how you kind of navigate through that process. So some reflections on that might also be interesting.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. As someone that was very much involved in the original proposal for the industrial clusters mission, that came very much from BEIS in terms of putting out a call for ideas around what could be the next theme of the clean growth strategy. Now, one of the things, colleagues, that I'm absolutely obsessed with doing is looking virtually every night at what the latest announcements are that are coming out from Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and from the Department for Education. I can see Kirstie nodding her head because she knows that every day I'm saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this.
It does.
That's one key source of information to be in there at the start of these things to help shape the agenda. The next thing, colleagues, is in terms of to answer the question a little bit further, Claire, is the different competitions as and when they get announced. So I'm sure that many colleagues on the line will get the regular updates from Innovate, for instance. Monthly, they produce a newsletter of new competitions. Keep your eyes on UKRI to see what UKRI are coming up with. They now have this industrial decarbonisation challenge team. So there's new funding coming out from that. Do keep your eyes on BEIS. Less so these days, it seems, with the research councils, but occasionally they have something as well, EPSRC, ESRC, etc., etc. So it's about just keeping on top of it. But at the moment with the UKRI projects, it's about, I would suggest, trying to align universities with the big industries in the area, making sure that those proactive engagement and knowledge exchange programs are in place. And I'd be having a chat with my Pro-Vice Chancellor if I was in another institution saying, well, what knowledge exchange activities are you involved in? Do you have a knowledge exchange concordat? Who are the key industries there? Can I help you with this? Can I join you in this? Is there any funding there to help me with this, to position a university? Because in the future, I actually believe that things like the knowledge exchange framework will become a key indicator for universities in the UK.
Yeah, and probably collect more to the ref as well through impact case studies. The other one I would add to the list that Joe said is Horizon Europe, because there's quite a strong theme there around sustainability and the environment. And obviously it's very much about collaboration across institutions. So Joe and I have met with the Welsh Government only on Monday of this week to talk about a potential opportunity there, specifically in relation to skills, because as you've rightly pointed out, Claire, there's quite a lot of stuff going on around the technical, but not so much on the skill side. So there's definitely room to explore that much more.
Yeah, definitely. It's really useful to flag that up. So Robin, you had another question around the ammonia. I know that there is ammonia was featured in the video as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more to unpack around that.
Yeah, there was stuff in the video, I think, on ammonia local to ends. But Joe, I think you mentioned the trade delegation that you've been talking to today, who in the Gulf, who were looking to export N million tons or tens of million tons of ammonia per year. in the Northwest Cluster plans, do they currently include the import of bulk ammonia as essentially as a fuel?
No. It's an interesting one, Robin, because elsewhere in the world, the transport of ammonia is really rising up the agenda. I'm thinking about some of the global work that I do in Australia, Japan, South Korea. That sort of Pacific area is really getting into the ammonia agenda. This morning, with the call that I was on with UAE, with the United Arab Emirates, it's clear that ammonia is beginning to raise up their particular agenda. Now, what I'd like to think is that a place like the Northwest, or indeed over in the Northeast ammonia plants, that there may well be opportunities there to potentially scale up production on the back of carbon capture and storage. You know, to use ammonia potentially as a storage medium, a storage vector for hydrogen, and itself begin to potentially participate in some of these export agendas should they begin to emerge. But Robin, as you know, hydrogen's just come from nowhere in the last 3 or 4 years. And, you know, it's great that it's absolutely achieved almost this hegemonic status within policy and academic circles over the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe ammonia will begin to catch up with that in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen ammonia effectively being talked about as a more cost-effective means of transporting hydrogen, since you can transport it as a liquid at low pressure, and so your density of transport is higher. So effectively taking hydrogen up to ammonia to transport, and then you either taking it back or using it directly as a fuel at the far end.
Correct. So in the UK, colleagues, there is some work going on in the ammonia agenda right now. Certainly the STFC down in Howe, working with Oxford University, they do have a green ammonia demonstration facility, but we also have a lot of what will be blue ammonia in the UK in the not too distant future through the carbon capture and storage agenda. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, really, really interesting new area as well. And I heard talk about yesterday in a meeting something about using ammonia in shipping as well, which was a new one to me.
Yeah, that's coming very quickly.
Yeah. Michael Lovegrove, there was another question around collaborations within the Northwest Cluster between different organisations. Did you want to just talk about that a little bit? If not, we can just read it out about collaboration with between HyNet and Mersey D Alliance, Deeside Energy Park Industries, other industries and organisations and groups within the Northwest.
So that's a really good question, Michael. Claire, clearly at the moment, in terms of the sequencing exercise, and from the video, you will see that at the moment we're principally concerned with the major emitters within the area as part of this Track 1 submission. But as we move forward post 2025, there will be other potential opportunities there. And we do have work funded by UKRI, which is concerned with the cluster plan, which is really reaching out into the wider geography. So beginning to think about carbon capture facilities that might go elsewhere on industrial parks, could go on other industrial facilities, how these will potentially bolt into and network into the anchor project, the HyNet anchor project. So yes, that's very much on our agenda. And of course, the Mersey cluster itself is both within the northwest of England, but it does extend, of course, across into North Wales. So, yeah, one of the interesting areas that I'm beginning to explore intellectually at the moment is what's going to happen with the 3 major combined gas cycle plants that we have in the northwest and North Wales. We've seen the government commit itself to closing all coal-fired power stations by 2025. Are combined gas cycle plants the next big thing on the agenda, or are they going to transition them across to hydrogen production, to hydrogen generating turbine, hydrogen utilizing turbines? In which case, again, they will need new carbon capture facilities associated with those blue plants. But equally, such a lot of bio plants emerging everywhere at the moment. They're a fabulous opportunity to bolt on carbon capture to that, and then all of a sudden they become negative emitters, taking us down to that sub-zero ambition that I'd love to see in my lifetime from the Northwest.
Just to add to that as well, from a Mersey D Alliance perspective, I'm on the directors group, and in relation to skills particularly, you've now got the universities in that geographical region on that group, as well as FE. So you've got the right people now together, which we hadn't before, to actually start to talk about skills pathway all the way through from level 1 in effect, or 2, depending on where industry needs to start, but then all the way through to level 8 across a range of those skills gaps. So yes is the short answer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was thinking about overlaps between HyNet and the industries around the Wrexham area and so forth, and Welsh Water's Five Fords water treatment plant just east of Wrexham, which has got anaerobic digestion and generating gas and potentially green sources of hydrogen, too, which could feed into the net.
Yeah, very much so, Michael. We are in discussions and deliberations with many organisations just across the border. So absolutely.
And the Cheshire West region as well. There's a lot going on there around the kind of agricultural and estate land that I'm aware of as well. So I've got another question from Esin Serin, which they've asked me to read out. Is the thinking around aligning carbon pricing and CCUS development moving fast enough? What are your thoughts around that?
That's a Joe question.
Yeah.
I was going to stay quiet, Kirstie.
No chance.
Yeah, I think it's not moved fast enough. I still have the scars on me from the White Rose project, to be honest with you, colleagues. Now, I would have loved the White Rose project to go ahead, and it's 8 or 9 years ago now since it was pulled. I think our ability to achieve the 4th and 5th carbon budget might have been somewhat easier. Needless to say, the government is committing itself in legislation to the 4th, 5th, 6th carbon budget, and the only way it's going to achieve that is through carbon capture and storage. And so the government wants it beyond the current cluster sequencing, through the Hydrogen Advisory Council work, through the stuff that the CCSA is doing, will, I think, revisit the carbon pricing mechanisms. Frontier Economics have already done quite a bit of work around carbon pricing and also hydrogen pricing. But I think in the run-up to the comprehensive spending review, there will be a real focus around that. And why do I think there will be a real focus around that? Because ultimately, on the back of cluster sequencing and the feed programs that we're doing in the various clusters, there's a final investment decision that has to be made. And that final investment decision does have to be attractive enough for investors, but equally it has to be within the law to make sure that we meet the legal requirements that the government's signing up to, especially in the run-up to COP. So I genuinely believe that Boris would want to say something in December around this issue as well.
Okay, thank you. Good optimistic answer to end on, I think. So we're coming up to our time. So I'd really like to thank both Kirstie and Joe for a really kind of lively presentation, and everybody for the questions and discussions. I think, Vic, did you want to come in and talk about the next session at all?
I would, thank you. I would just like to say as well, thank you very much to Joe and Kirstie for such a great presentation, and also to Claire for such excellent chairing duties as well. So just next week, we have the realities of deploying post-combustion CO2 capture, corrosion happens. And that's from Dr. Kira Campbell at the University of Sheffield. So I hope that some of you will be able to join us same time next week, Thursday, 2 o'clock. But yeah, otherwise, I'd just like to thank everybody very much for coming, and our presenters and our chair. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all this afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.